Dave, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to hop on here. For the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, your motivation, and kind of where you are currently?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on. It's an honor, especially seeing some of the other guests you've had on. So, appreciate you asking me to do this. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say I'm really a soccer person at
Hmm.
heart. Grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, played soccer, went to Virginia Tech, tried playing overseas a little bit. Always assumed I was going to go the coaching route when I
Hmm.
was done playing.
Yeah.
Went to George Mason post, so I played at Virginia Tech, went overseas, did some of the indoor stuff,
Hmm.
came back and tried to finish my education at George Mason. Did undergrad in coaching science there, moved into the grad program. During that time, had the opportunity to go to Kansas City
Mm.
in MLS. The last couple of years before they were the Wizards, before they became Sporting KC.
Okay.
Um, Worked 2 years there as a fitness coach and goalkeeper coach,
Mm.
and then moved on to Seattle, where being in Seattle almost 9 seasons,
Wow.
and saw this kind of evolution of that role in the departments, and really started seeing how going from this one man show doing a ton of stuff
Hmm.
to by the time I ended having roughly a staff of 5 people.
Yeah.
Um, and and then 2017 had the opportunity to become high performance director for the Orlando Magic, the NBA. And even though soccer is and always will be kind of my passion and love, I just figured from a professional development standpoint, to take that opportunity and to work in this sort of an organization
Yeah.
was something that I thought was really valuable where I was in my career at that time, and probably would be my last opportunity to kind of do something like that. And
Yeah.
so I took that opportunity, and finishing my third season there.
Wow. Fantastic. Okay. So how have those past positions kind of set you up for success now?
I think you go from one that is fully practitioner.
Hmm.
I think we're really kind of boots on the ground, doing everything. I mean, there was a period in my second year in Kansas City that I was actually goalkeeper coach, assistant coach, um, and strength conditioning
Wow.
coach. All together.
Yeah.
So then you're in this phase where you're out, you're doing the first bit of practice. The other assistant coach are taking the goalkeepers a little bit. You do the first 30 minutes of practice with the team, and then you jump with the goalkeepers. You make sure heart rate monitors are on all the guys at that time, and those
Yeah.
before GPS,
Yeah.
2008. And practice ends. You do a little bit extra with the goalkeepers. You make sure all the heart rate monitors get where they're at. You go and you got to get to the weight room,
Hmm.
do your weight training session. If that was a week where I had kind of a video edit, I have to figure out what I was going to do with the video edit.
Yeah.
Um, then download the data,
Hmm.
put all the data into Excel. Do the training report, and essentially it was, for me, would be kind of 3 to 4 different people's jobs at that point.
Yeah.
Really having to do that all on your own, I think, kind of sets you up for success, because you've walked in all of your all of your staff members. You've kind of walked through
Hmm.
their job at some level yourself.
Yeah.
And I think now what can be missing now is that we specialize so early and so young.
Hmm.
I think that becomes a perspective for how we see the profession,
Hmm.
and we kind of miss out on what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And so I think having been forced to do all that,
Hmm.
I think gives you an appreciation for what your whole staff has to go through on a daily basis.
Okay. So with that specialization piece, right? What would you say? Because it seems like many of the job markets or many of the job destinations, right, are requiring that specialization from people. And while I
Yeah.
agree that it's not the best route, how would you kind of juxtaposition those two?
I think that's where it comes in from a leadership standpoint. Like right
Hmm.
now with Orlando, we've got Bryce Murphy is our applied sports scientist,
Hmm.
who's fantastically talented, and
Yeah.
does a ton of coding in R. Built up all of our reporting through R. Pulling stuff out of our database,
Yeah.
and yet he could be a very good strength coach.
Mm.
And I think it's important. So there's periods of time where I would demand that he watch the team video to make sure he knows what the players have to be doing to understand the
Hmm.
athletes movements more.
Mm-hmm.
He travels with us at times just so he gets a sense of, okay, what does fatigue really mean when you're living it and feeling it?
Yeah.
There's times where he has to, we ask him to work in the weight room and coach guys
Yeah.
to build that kind of rapport with guys. And so maybe it's like an 80-20 rule where 80% of your job should be focused on why you're there, but that other 20 you've got to kind of figure out, appreciate what everyone else in that department has to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then this is kind of off on a tangent, right? But what does the term applied sports scientist mean to you, right? Because I know a lot of different people, a lot of different universities have started to implement that title or that position in their organization. But I feel like the definition of it is somewhat fluid.
Yeah. Because I think we've got the research side, and then we've got kind of the applied side. And I think a lot of people think they're doing applied sports science, but they're not. They're actually doing more evidence-based and research sports science. So, applied sports science is really collecting data that changes things on a daily basis. Right? Like if we're collecting data that gives us some sort of indication, allows us to have some sort of conversation, or allows me to walk up to the head coach's office and talk about some player. That's kind of the applied setting. It's like, where are these guys today, but based on historical data, right? So we're not being reactionary, but we're creating this kind of robust framework of data where, as we're collecting data on a daily basis, we can then compare that to what guys have done past months, past years, which then allows us to have a better sense of where someone is today. That makes us potentially change what they're doing today. And we may not actually change what they're doing today, but I think we have to be set up to potentially make a change for what someone might be doing today.
Okay. Yeah.
And to me, I think that is the applied side. The applied side means we're really trying to capture what are athletes, first and foremost, what are athletes doing in game, right? What are they doing in competition?
Okay.
I think that's most important. And I think that's often most missed.
Yeah.
You can get into HRV and wellness and some of those things without actually understanding what they're doing in the game first. So, what are the actual demands of the game?
Yeah.
How are they coping with the demands of the game? What do we have to change on a daily basis to help make better decisions and really use the data to affect, as a performance staff, our decision making, but also as a coaching staff, the coaching staff's decision making. So, I would say that's what I consider kind of applied sports science. And it's also creating this framework for, we have this discussion, like you're always trying to figure out what the next question is going to be, using the data to figure out what the next question is going to be. And a lot of sports scientists, they can learn R coding and they can learn the data visualizations, but it comes down to, if I would take an applied sports scientist and put them in whatever 20 different sports teams throughout the country, what they would come up with should look different in each one of those settings, because each setting has its own set of questions that have to be answered in their own unique way based on what the coach wants to do. How does the coach like to play? What does that group of athletes look like? What are the demands of that particular sport? What are the demands of the way that coach likes to practice? And so we have to set something up where how we're visualizing the data, how we're reporting the data is unique to that specific environment. And that's the role of the applied sports scientist, is to figure out how to do that best.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I think that helps narrow, the field of play down a little bit, right? Because again, before, I think it was just a title that people put out there, so they had it on their staff, right? But I think that's very helpful to look at it through that lens. And then,
what I kind of see a lot of times is that you'll have a young sports scientist will come in and they'll collect all this data, and then they'll give you a report that has 20 metrics on it.
Yeah.
And I'll look at it and say, but what questions are you answering? Like whatever we're visualizing, whatever we are analyzing, has to be answering the questions that someone in this organization has. Right. And so putting 20 things on a few pieces of paper and handing it to a coach, that doesn't answer any of their questions necessarily. Right. So we have to figure out what their questions are. And then start this process where we start with the really simple questions. You know you're doing it right when the coach says, okay, like I like that, well, but I want to know this, or
Yeah.
yeah, but what about this?
Mm-hmm.
And then that leads to another graph, another page, another metric,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're starting to really answer questions specific to the sport in that environment.
Okay. What kind of recommendations would you have for coaches that are trying to do something, similar as you, or even get into that applied sports science route?
It's funny. I mean, I get that question asked a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I want to be transparent and say it was never my motivation to work in the NBA at all.
Okay.
If you'd asked me
Yeah.
15 years ago, I would say I'm never working in the NBA. I
Yeah.
have no desire to work in the NBA. So I do think it's about following your interest, following your passion, and then seeing what kind of the next step from a career perspective, is for you, for anyone out there.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think this is a really rapidly developing career path,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, and so, I think, again, first and foremost, really trying to figure out the demands of it. Like we talk about the demands of a certain sport, what does that mean from a more scientific perspective?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's that first path, and like you're watching a game, but what's truly happening in the game, right? And so, I mean, I was lucky in 2004 to go live in Czech Republic and take some courses in the Czech Republic, and we looked at their educational system was looking at the game of soccer through this kind of energy systems standpoint that I had never seen before, and that kind of opened up my eyes to, okay, we can see this game from this totally different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as young practitioners, you should always be challenging yourself to make pushing yourself that there's a whole lot out there that you don't know, right? And I think that's that openness sometimes that I think that we gain as we go on. Like one of the sayings I use a lot of times is, young practitioners, a lot of times they don't know what they don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right? So they don't know there's a whole layers of things out there that they just haven't been confronted with yet. But it's coming, as long as they stay in that in that career path. Like it's coming down the road, and so you have to stay open to that.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's how to deal with a coach, or how to deal with troubled players, or how to deal with players making 10 times more than you do. Like there's a whole series of things that you will eventually run into that you have to be open to those experiences and learning. And then also, if it's the coaching side, I think you just have to coach, right? And people like to deal with really high level athletes really early in their career.
Yeah.
But we should all be going through this phase where you're coaching or working with 5 to 6 different groups a day.
Yeah.
I mean, there was shortly before I went to Kansas City in MLS, I had a period where I was with George Mason men's and women's soccer programs. I was doing stuff with the Washington Freedom Women's Pro team as well, and was director of coaching for the girls' Washington Freedom Academy.
Yeah.
And essentially, I had 5 really, really high quality teams I was working with on a daily basis with George Mason men, George Mason women. There was a under 15 girls team that was one of the top in the country, an under 17 boys team, and another club that I was working with, and then Washington Freedom women's team. 5 really, really good teams within their own level and age group.
Yeah.
And I had the ability that I could try anything I wanted with those with that group.
Yeah.
And I figured out, okay, maybe what works with under 15s doesn't work with full professionals, and the difference between males and females, and just having over the course of 18 hours to work with 5 different teams like that had so many benefits, because I do think that we all have to make mistakes too.
Yeah.
Again, I think as we go through this career path that young coaches try to advance. We all want to advance our careers really quickly, but I think that we all have to go to this phase where you make mistakes and you screw things up, and hopefully you're not going to screw things up that's too detrimental to a group of people or to a team. But we've all made mistakes where we thought that whatever training load A was going to elicit adaptation B, and we just got it all wrong.
Yeah.
and I think if we're going to be high level practitioners, we all have to go through that phase.
I like that. Okay. So let's dive a little bit more into the training piece, right? And so over the course of your career, like what is some of the most notable pieces of technology that you have used, or, is that kind of currently in the position that you have now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky to be in MLS in a time when teams were I think we are the first team in MLS to utilize GPS
Okay.
in about 2011. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I came into MLS using heart rate monitors in about 2007, and by 2011, we were one of the first teams to use GPS, and allowed us to be kind of ahead of the curve in how we're using GPS. And
Yeah.
again, that allowed people like Chad Kolarsik, who's now in Colorado, and Garrison Draper at Philly. The three of us, in the 2011 to 2012 period, were using GPS fairly early. And then we ended up moving into this, probably 2016, 2015, 2016, some of the optical tracking data in game, because I do think, again, it's some of the most compelling data is really figuring out what your athletes are doing in game.
Yeah.
Optical tracking has the advantage where what you're doing in game is only, in some ways, is only important if it's relative to what the opponent is also doing in game.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's questions that are answered when you know what both teams are doing, not just what you can always put GPS units on your guys or girls, and they can go play a game and you'll get some data.
Yeah.
But there's so much contextual that happens within a game that it's actually really important to know what the other team is doing as well.
Okay.
And so, some of the optical tracking technology gives you that piece. And then again, we go into, whether it's in MLS or, in the NBA, where we're using force decks, some of the force plate technology, and that's quite important. With basketball, that's critically important.
Yeah.
Soccer, using your Nord board and your groin bar, and those are critical for soccer. But in the basketball, the vertical component becomes so important. So some of the force decks, and then I also think I'm still a fan of using Omega Wave and kind of assessing athletes' long-term response to things has a huge important component to managing athletes over a whole season as well. So
yeah. Okay.
I mean, I am also a fan, I think, while we used heart rate early in my career, still I think the use of heart rate relative to mechanical workloads still is a very important piece as well. So if I had it my way, we'd have some sort of tracking along with heart rate. Currently in the NBA, we're using Connexon without heart rate. But obviously in MLS, most teams using some sort of GPS or OPS system with heart rate as well. So.
Okay. So how are you able to kind of implement some of that technology into your initial assessments for the current position you're in?
Yeah. I think that, again, because the sport is such a vertical sport, that's, it's the biomechanical side in terms of force and power production and, the verticality of it, that is an important screen.
Yeah.
So I think that's paired together with a lot of the work from the physical therapists in terms of what's going on with the joints, specifically ankle, knee, hip, but in particular, ankle and knee becomes so important. So there's a whole physical therapy side in terms of just kind of some of the manual assessments and and joint mobility, but that's paired with some of the force plate assessments that we do. From biomechanical side. So.
Okay. And so, coming from soccer world, like load management, that's a huge piece of it, right? And we kind of mentioned that earlier. How does that kind of look different at different levels of sport, right? So now, like, let's say professional soccer versus professional basketball, and with load management being or having starting to be more of a talking point within the NBA, right? Resting players, things like that. How do those two kind of look comparatively?
I mean, the number of games, I think, the big difference is within professional soccer, you have a game and you have anywhere from 3 to 8 days between those games. Where you have a game, you assess the workload in a game, you might assess the internal response post game the day after the game. Then you lay out a program for what that might look like to get players kind of back to baseline or back to as fresh a state as possible prior to the next game. And then if you only have 3 days because you play whatever Sunday, Wednesday, well then you might have to make some decisions that we do have to significantly manage the load and maybe pull a player out and or he comes off the bench or work with the coaching staff to make that sort of decision. But in basketball, you might play 5 games in a 8-day period.
Yeah.
So there's no time in between games where you actually are managing load per se.
Okay.
Other than a potentially short practice, but if you're playing 5 games in 8 days, you're not using time between games to really manage load at all, because there essentially is no load if you're playing in between games. You're playing 5 games in 8 days, so it's really learning again what sort of recovery protocols do athletes prefer, making sure you're getting you're making those available to the athletes, and and having some discussions with the coaching staff in terms of where guys are at. But I think that's from the basketball side and from the NBA side. You have multiple players in the 80s and 90s that will talk about how they played 82 games and they were fine. And that kind of undermines a lot of the concept of load management. When in the end, like 82 games in that period of time, like it's tough. Like it's hard. And you see guys get beat up, and from our standpoint, it's we've got very good therapists on staff, and so I think it ends up being the application of a lot more let's say passive therapy protocols in terms of soft tissue treatments that end up happening between games. So you're not actually managing the load, you're trying to manage the effects of the load as much as possible between games. And especially again looking at the joints and what's happening around foot, ankle, knee, loss of mobility in some of those places. Just to make sure guys are still moving well, turned on. So I guess it's 2 totally different strategies, because you don't have the 3, 4, 5 days like you do in a soccer microcycle or week.
Okay. And so with that, on that same idea, right, if we pull on that thread a little bit more, so talking again about soccer, right, so their space between games might be longer, right, but would you say that their competitive time, right, is longer because of all the different leagues, international club teams, things like that? Would you say that compares at all?
It's a different dynamic. I mean, it's you're trying to manage athletes over 10 months, let's say. Like I oftentimes will talk about our 2016 year with Seattle, when we went kind of back to back MLS Cup finals, and I think in each those 2 years, roughly the first day of preseason was around January 20th, and in the MLS Cup final ended up December 10th. Right, and how do you keep an athlete kind of going and keep their head above water over that 10.5 month period?
It's a long time.
It's just different, and I think you have time. The difference is, like, yes, it has challenges. You want to have a good athlete monitoring system in place. You want to see how they're responding. You want to prevent them from kind of falling off the cliff eventually, but you have time to react. The difference between that and the NBA is, in the NBA there's so little time to react, and sometimes that ends up being we have morning shoot around, in any non back-to-back game day, you've got, morning shoot around at 10, and, our therapist can be working on guys from, 11 to 12:15 on a game day, knowing they're going to go take a nap and come back and play a game. That becomes kind of a more stressful environment from day to day to day to do that over
Okay.
82 games,
Yeah.
then, to kind of, I would say, I guess, be more strategic in how you're managing these
Mm-hmm.
athletes over 10 and a half, 11
Yeah.
months.
Okay. And then you already talked about, the back-to-back games and, how there's little time between that. How would you kind of affect readiness? Or was that all kind of dependent upon what modes of recovery the player preferred? Or was there anything that you did, right? You did the Omega Wave score, say it came out with a low score. Was there anything that you could do to try to peak that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the individualization comes to, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where I think maybe that's the actual sports science side, and
Mm-hmm.
who needs cryo the morning of the game versus who needs
Mm-hmm.
longer, slower, kind of soft tissue session,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's where those decisions come in, and maybe Omega Wave gives you some insight in terms of like a
Mm-hmm.
sympathetic versus parasympathetic dominance, kind of response long term, and
Mm-hmm.
who needs kind of a weight room activation session 2 hours before the game versus someone that has to be kind of calmed down because they're in this kind of heightened, stressed out state. So
Yeah.
um, I do think that hopefully we have the technology and we are getting the feedback from the athletes where we're really seeing on game day what or post game what does each individual need that's best in terms of like who needs to be really turned on and revved up versus who needs to kind of be calmed down a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's clearly not this kind of one size fits all response, post game or pre game,
Mm.
in terms of what's going to help keep guys going over those 82 games.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then if we're comparing, in season versus out of season, how do those two structures of training kind of look when you put them side by side?
You mean NBA versus soccer?
Or just NBA in season versus off season?
Okay, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. Like the NBA offseason is a huge critical piece
Mm-hmm.
to athlete development overall, right? So even your from a technical standpoint,
Yeah.
the coaching staff wants to move a first year 32% 3-point shooter to a 37% 3-point
Mm-hmm.
shooter by year two.
Yeah.
There's some really clear benchmarks technically that the coaching staff wants to get them to, and
Mm-hmm.
it gives us the opportunity. If you look at most of our athletes that are drafted have come, especially this whole kind of one and done phase where we're finding a lot of the guys that have this kind of one and done in college, they've not been forced, kind of to strength train or asked to strength train consistently, and then they kind of end their strength training as soon as their season's done, and they go in this draft process. And so kind of from an athlete development standpoint for that whole year of college,
Mm-hmm.
it's not been a full complete year like
Yeah.
you see from a typical collegiate strength conditioning program. So we are getting young guys in that are still a little bit underpowered or just have not developed all the habits just because they have not been asked to,
Yeah.
in this current kind of climate with guys coming out early.
Mm.
So again, those first two off seasons become really critical for power and hypertrophy, and a lot of our guys end up having to gain 10, 15 pounds of muscle. And
Yeah.
our strength staff did a fantastic job last year for two of our previous two first round draft picks, where they both put on 20 pounds of muscle. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I use the example of the kid Jonathan Isaac, that's a third year player now, and I think last year with us he did something like 55 strength training sessions in the off season.
Wow.
Right, and so
Yeah.
you can do a lot if you get 55 strength training sessions in an off season.
Yeah.
And so he responded very well to that, gained a lot of strength, gained a lot of power, and again, versus like the MLS.
Yeah.
Then you take it to the MLS side, and we were talking about these 10 and a half month seasons where you have a 4 to 6 week period where you want guys to get a little bit of a strength stimulus. You want them to regain some of the muscle and lean mass they lost in
Mm-hmm.
season, and then kind of get them back to at least their starting point from the previous season, and then
Yeah.
you've done an okay job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay.
it's two totally different environments, but
Yeah.
that is what makes the NBA interesting. Is like the off season, you can do so much and really challenge guys to
Mm-hmm.
to really make some major gains from an athletic standpoint.
Okay. And so you mentioned strength and conditioning a little bit, right? So how much overlap is there between, you and strength and conditioning? And do you guys, do you do any hands-on work with the guys, or what does that look like?
No, I think in the current role, um, quite a few, I think, of this high performance directors, this role within the NBA has become one where um, it's become such a management role.
Okay.
Because again, we've got the medical staff. I think right now we currently have a staff of 10 to 11 people in terms of the medical staff and nutrition and sports psychology, and then the strength staff and the applied sports science staff. That it is not within my current role in the NBA to do anything in terms of one-on-one with the athletes. I mean, even if my office is in the weight room, we hire very, very good strength coaches, and they work with our guys in the weight room, and I end up going back and forth and having talks with coaches. And one of the other areas of responsibility is a lot of the contact with our agents. Each player's agent I end up knowing fairly well as well. So it's a different dynamic in terms of what other people might be doing in our similar positions in different kind of in different sports.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Is that something that you one day want to get back to, or is that something you want to merge the two, like a high performance director as well as some kind of hands-on, or what does the future kind of look like?
I think in the NBA, how this current role is how it has to be.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean, obviously I think of myself as a coach.
Yeah.
In terms of my background. I think this is how it has to be in the NBA, because you do have enough talks with upper management and with agents and with the coaching staff pre-practice, and it's just not realistic to do that and spend time with the athletes. But but I'd be lying to say that I don't miss the coaching and the work with the athletes on a daily basis, and that first 25-30 minutes of practice you would have with the athletes in MLS, and that's you do feel a connection with the athletes at that level that within the role in the NBA, you just don't quite have that connection, because you're spending your time connecting with agents and upper management.
Everyone else, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what are some resources that have had a big impact on your development, right? So whether that's like a podcast or, an internship or, just a conversation with another coach.
I'm not sure if you ever attended, but obviously, in Seattle, we had the Seattle Sports Science Conference that we had there. That was, I always felt like, we created that there for ourselves to help make ourselves better for as much as, anything else. It was great having the number of people in to bring out there. But, I think those types of conferences are great. There are so many good podcasts out there. I think like the Pacey Performance podcast is fantastic, and I think has such great speakers on there. But but I think I would just say that just traveling. I think the podcasts are great and the conferences are great, but I found the most valuable resources are really as you build out your networks, maybe from the conferences, that you're actually going seeing people work in their environment. Yeah, I think that's so critical. That I think people miss is that you can be at a bar and have a talk with someone or hear someone give a 45-minute presentation and you kind of think what they're doing, but it's really most beneficial if you get the opportunity to go to someone's workplace and spend a couple of days and really see what they're doing. So I think to me those have always been, if I look back over the last 15 years or so, the ability to go visit people overseas, and even this past off season, I had not done kind of the soccer tours at all, so I went to Germany and Holland this last August, and spent 3 days with Bayer Leverkusen in Germany, and then met up with the coaching staff for Borussia Mönchengladbach, and went to the strength staff for Eintracht Frankfurt and visited them and watched a game with them, and then went across and visited PSV Eindhoven and then Ajax, and you really kind of get and then if you have, let's say, a network of 5, 6, 7 staffs that you're used to going to, then you check in with them every couple of years and say, okay, what are you guys doing that's new? This is what we're doing that's new. And you kind of see what everyone else is doing, and it kind of just helps keep you updated, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. And so would that be your same advice to young coaches trying to differentiate themselves in the field? To kind of go seek out some mentors and actually visit them?
Yeah, but like I said before, I think with the younger
Mm-hmm.
practitioners, they just have to coach.
Mm.
Like I think
Yeah.
just don't try. Maybe we talked about this already, but
Mm.
don't strive to work with the highest level of athlete
Yeah.
too soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Go coach and work with people.
Yeah.
Because again, I think it's a it's a people first
Mm-hmm.
job, right? And
Yeah.
so people skills are so important.
Mm-hmm.
How do you motivate people? How do you connect with people? How do you speak to, it's one of the things I think our young staff that comes in, um, you can tell oftentimes that they speak to their athletes in a very particular way based on whatever group they had before, right?
Mm.
And so um, we often have, if people that have only worked in the collegiate setting will come in and they will coach their athletes like
Yeah.
they're college guys.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if that's a pro level, like that just doesn't work so
Yeah.
efficiently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's a good point.
so again, to do internships with pro teams and then to coach them collegiately and to and it takes time,
Yeah.
and I think it's maybe I'd say like through people's entire 20s, they should be trying to just coach and
Mm-hmm.
be around as much different athletes as possible.
Mm.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
that's my own
Yeah.
advice, I guess.
Yeah. I like that. Okay. And so moving into this kind of last segment right here with some things kind of just about you and your development, right? So if you have any, what are some quotes that you live by?
My favorite quote that I find I use probably like 3 to 4 times a week is if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I think that's it's so true across so many areas of our life
Yeah.
where people have a strength.
Mm-hmm.
People might develop one strength
Mm-hmm.
and they think that strength solves everything.
Yeah.
And that could be the strength coach that is unbelievable
Mm-hmm.
is strength power development.
Yeah.
And so they feel like I don't need to condition my athletes. We just got to get strong because if we get strong, they're going to be more resilient,
Yeah.
right? Or, the therapist as well. As long as I get my athlete on my table and I can do the work I need on my table, then he's going to be good.
Yeah.
So I think it's people, and maybe that's human nature to kind of overestimate your own strengths relative to other people's strengths.
Yeah.
But I do feel like it is. You can apply that quote in so many levels in your life that is, it's remarkable.
Okay. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
That's a tough one. I feel like I've been given so many good pieces of advice. I mean, one of the latest ones that I'm lucky to have a very, very good president and a very, very good GM with the Orlando Magic, and I feel like they've both been 25 plus years in the NBA.
Yeah.
And so to have people that have that level of experience,
Yeah.
have been around that many high caliber, world class athletes,
Yeah.
and my club president here, Jeff Weltman, says something all the time that he reminds me where the most important part of our jobs,
Mm-hmm.
and I think even coaches' jobs, is to ask better questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about asking the right questions and
Yeah.
spending a lot of time thinking about the quality of the questions that you ask.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we ask really basic questions to our athletes, trying to bring out the information that we want on that daily basis.
Yeah.
But I think the really, really smart, clever leaders, they just ask different questions.
Yeah.
So I think that his advice is always like, I know you asked the agent this, why didn't you ask the agent that? Like, that's the better question. And so
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time talking about those sorts of things that I think are valuable.
Okay. In contrast to that, what's the worst advice you've ever been given?
I don't know. I feel like I'm lucky enough that I have not had a lot of bad advice.
Okay. Very good.
I've
Yeah.
kind of been blessed where I've got lots of very, very good mentors and people in front of me, and so there's nothing that really sticks out where there was like bad advice given that I follow that kind of blew up in my face.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's great to hear. Okay, so last question kind of on here, right, is what are some projects you're currently working on, and how can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey?
Well, sadly, I mean, we're in this coronavirus space, and so a lot of the projects we're working on are not so relevant,
Yeah.
right now. We had a Orlando Magic kind of this high performance conference that was supposed to be in June will likely be pushed back.
Mm.
That we had a really good first year last year, and it was some great presenters,
Mm-hmm.
and we are going to continue that this year, which kind of put a stop on for right now, but
Yeah.
hopefully it'll come back. And
Yeah.
that's Orlando Next Level Conference, it's called, and that's on Twitter. I
Okay.
mean, most of my stuff,
Yeah.
it's at Dave Tenney on Twitter. That's
Okay.
kind of what I keep up to date on things. But again,
Yeah.
it's sadly with where we're at right now in the world, everything's kind of come to a crashing halt on things and
Yeah.
projects and all that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but when everything is up and running again, we
Yeah.
will start that back up, and
Okay.
and I guess we'll have to see long term, in terms of the viability of conferences down the road and how many months away we are from having conferences. But,
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it, and so I know I did. So once again, thank you for your time.
well,
And
thank you.
yeah, looking forward to connecting again soon in the future.
Likewise, thanks for having me.